we will move on to our next speaker, if you are ready, Mr. Camus. Renaud Camus is an acclaimed French writer, and I don't know if you agree with that. You are the inventor of the term "the Great Replacement." At least you are the man who made it popular. And you have come to Norway now again. We met last evening, and we look forward to your speech. I could also mention that at least one of your books is translated into Norwegian, and I'm sure that many people could have benefit from reading that book. So thank you, Mr. Camus. I look forward to your speech.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, the Great Replacement is not a theory. I wish to God it was, and it was only that. The Great Replacement is a crime, and it is committed by those who call it a theory. The Great Replacement, or genocide by substitution, the change of people and civilization, is the crime against humanity of the 21st century. It doesn't have to kill, although it does more and more with its daily throat cuttings and rapes in Europe. It doesn't have to kill, it replaces. It is not a genocide by subtraction. It is a genocide by addition, by submersion, by covering, by overlaying. It is not the worst or the most atrocious political crime ever committed, but it is by far the largest, the widest, since it affects, one way or another, tens of millions of people on 3 continents, if not more. The only way to put an end to this disaster is remigration. We are here to speak about remigration. But if you will allow me to do so, I would like to treat of a slightly different notion, or rather to make use of a slightly different word, namely decolonization. My point is that remigration and decolonization are almost synonymous. They are one and the same thing. But one word, decolonization, has the advantage on the other, as an advantage on the other, and that advantage is that it makes the thing, remigration, possible. No foreign occupation has ever ended without the departure of the occupier. No colonization has ever finished without the return to his own lands and countries of the colonist. Europe is 20 times more colonized now than it ever colonized itself in the past. And of course, this is even more true about countries like Norway, who never colonized anybody, at least not in the last 7 or 8 centuries. The essence, the very essence of colonization is the transfer of population. There are probably 20 times, if not 100 times, more Africans in Europe now as a consequence of the present soft North colonization, the big one, but there were Europeans in Africa at the height of the old colonization, the North-South colonization. Of all the types known of colonization, demographic colonization is by far the worst, because there is a very high risk for it to be irretrievable. Remigration, before it is too late, is the only way to prevent war, violence, and crime, but also the destruction of the Europeans of Europe and of their civilization. But remigration is indeed against the law. You will have to forgive me here, because the word law, L-O-W, is absolutely the most difficult word in English to pronounce for a Frenchman, which is very unlucky, because the law is unfortunately the problem. Remigration is contrary to the national laws. It is against the judges who practice so ardently the two-tier system in favor of the occupier. It is against the supranational cause of justice. It is against all the international treaties and conventions. You know that a classical topos of detective story, and that at least since the times of Sophocles, is that of the investigator, the detective, finds out, like Oedipus did, Oedipus Rex, that he is himself the criminal he is trying to identify. A more interesting, original, and accurate structure for a modern day detective story or detective writer would be for the investigator to find out that the criminal is the law. Law? Law. Law. I can't make the difference between law and law. Law. In a colonial situation such as ours, the criminal has to be the law, the colonial law, the law that imposes and defends colonization. Precedent speaker has explained to you that the law in Norway or the power in Norway wanted people to come in always bigger number. No colonization can end in the respect of the colonial law. No remigration can occur in the respect of the law that has imposed invasion and foreign occupation. This is why the concept of decolonization is essential, because it implies and fully legitimates breaking with the law. The law which cannot be legal since it is criminal, because it is indeed very criminal to impose the change of people in a country. It's one of the the worst thing any power can do. I will give you an example from rather French history, but for instance, to make you better understand what I'm trying to say. When Algeria conquered its independence from France in the middle of the last century, it did not care one bit about the French law, since it was a colony and it wanted to become free and independent. The colonial law could not apply. It was as if it was non-existent. And Algeria imposed the remigration of the French who had been in Algeria for much, much longer time than the present colonial occupier has been in Europe. It imposed it with violence and massacres to which no one in the world at the time made the slightest objections, since they were for the sacred good of decolonization, which is admitted the world over. I certainly do not recommend to imitate that violence and those massacres. Indeed not, quite to the contrary. Thank goodness there are other ways to convince a colonial occupier to leave and to liberate the national territory. Be it only, and first of all, by depriving him of all the advantages he had to stay in the first place. Remigration can be and has to be perfectly bloodless and indeed spare a lot of blood. And it would be a good occasion, in any case, to show the difference of civilization which happen to be both the problem and, fortunately, the solution.